Welcome to the Ain't That the Truth podcast. I'm Rev. Melissa, your host. We are here to proclaim that truth's name is Jesus. We rely on the Bible to explore, understand, and grow in absolute truth. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Ain't That the Truth. This is Rev. Melissa, and I'm your host, and I am excited to be with you guys today. I wanted to take a quick moment to apologize that it's been a few weeks since we have posted an episode. I've been a little under the weather, but I am back up and running and ready to go. So I apologize for the little sabbatical that I had to take from recording a podcast episode, but trust me, you would not have wanted to hear all the coughing. So it was actually for your benefit for sure. Today we are going to continue our biblical hero series by talking about Joseph, which is one of my favorite biblical heroes to discuss, and it's going to be an awesome time. But first, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a global worker update. As you know, I am a global worker to West Africa, and I am currently in the process of raising my funds. And this morning, I had the awesome opportunity to go to Abundant Life Church in Lebanon, Kentucky, and tell them about what God's doing in West Africa. It was a fruitful time, both financially and spiritually, and I am so excited I had the opportunity to go and to minister to them this morning by letting them know God's heart for West Africa. In the last couple weeks, I've gotten several donations and a few monthly partners. I am excited. The Lord is good, and He is faithful to His people. And so I am absolutely excited to be heading to West Africa soon. The hope is to be there in January of 2024. And so I'm just going to keep on pressing forward and pursuing that. But in the meantime, we are going to continue to do some podcasting. All right, so let's dig deep into Joseph's life today. The life of Joseph. And remember, we call them biblical heroes instead of characters because these were real life people who lived in biblical times, and their legacy is strong. It was in the Bible, so their legacy is strong, and we can learn from both their weaknesses and their strengths. We can learn from their mistakes and learn from their successes. And so I am excited, like I said, to talk about Joseph today. So we're going to start off in the book of Genesis, chapter 37. So here we're kind of got to get just an idea of who Joseph was. So he is Jacob's son, and he is Jacob's son that was born to him in his old age. And so we're going to start with chapter 37, verse 3. It says, Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. So here is the background. He is what you would call probably just the golden child, the favorite out of all of the brothers. And so his brothers already just kind of have some issue with them because of their father's love for him, the father's special love for Joseph. Joseph, is being lavished with this awesome robe, or what I learned as a kid, the Technicolor Dreamcoat, that Joseph was given. And so there's already jealousy and envy between Joseph and his brothers. But then it gets worse. So starting in verse 5, one night Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. Listen to this dream, he said. We were out in the field tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered round and bowed low before mine. So here, Joseph basically is having this dream, and you could say it's a prophetic dream, that his brothers would be bowing down to him one day, so that therefore he would be higher ranked than his brothers. And so, see, they already had jealousy towards Joseph, and then you add Joseph, spilling the beans about this dream that he had, which is causing other animosity. And then it says, soon Joseph had another dream, and again he told his brothers about it. Listen, I have had another dream, he said. The sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed low before me. This time he told the dream to his father as well as his brothers, but his father scolded him. What kind of dream is that? He asked. Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow to the ground before you? But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father wondered what the dream meant. So see here again. He's telling of this dream, and his brothers are just having more animosity toward him. So there's a few things that I wanted to point out just in chapter 37, when it comes to the dreams that Joseph was having and what is happening here. God was the one that gives these dreams, okay? So first off, know that these are dreams from God, because we know what happens later on in the story. If you've read the Bible any at all, you know what happens in this story. And so we know that this is actually going to be true, that Joseph is actually going to be put into a very highly esteemed position because of what the gifts that God gives him and allows him to do with those gifts. But know that these dreams are not of Joseph, they are actually of God. Number 2 is something else to be mindful of. Don't get prideful. So here, Joseph is having these dreams, and instead of just kind of laying low, knowing that there's already some animosity between him and his brothers, and that maybe I should just hold up and just hold on to this and not really share it, he's going around like, listen to this dream that I had. We should never get prideful. Don't get prideful. God is going to exalt us, but it says in the word that he exalts the humble. And so we cannot let pride step in the way, because when we let pride step in the way, then God can't do, or rather won't do, in our lives what he wants to do if we let pride get in the way. And this is what Joseph does right here, is he kind of lets pride get in the way, which kind of leads to my point number 3 in this section. Be careful who you share your dreams with and when. And here's what I mean by that. God gave Joseph these dreams, and I know sometimes when we get dreams from the Lord and when God lays something on our heart that he wants for us to do, we get excited, as we should. We should get excited about what the Lord's laying on our heart. We should get excited about what God is doing. However, we have to be careful in these moments and ask God, okay, is this something that I'm supposed to keep to myself for now and just kind of think about for myself right now? Or is this something that I am actually supposed to be thinking about in regards to sharing with others at this point? Because there is a time and there's a place and there is a way to share what God is doing in your life and what God's calling you to do, and the dreams, the big dreams that he's given you. There's a way to share these, and it's important that we do so in the right time, in the right moment, and not to share them too soon, if that makes sense. And here, Joseph, I believe, was sharing it too soon. He was again letting that pride step in the way, and so he was sharing his dream. And what ends up happening later, I think, is a result of him not keeping his mouth shut. Sometimes we have to keep our mouth shut and just know, hey, right now I've got to guard this. This is something sacred. It's a dream. It's a calling that God has placed on my life. But right now is not the time to pursue it, or right now is not the time to be public with it. I need to hold on to it, pursue it privately, and then later on maybe make it public. And so it's very, very important that we are in tune with the Holy Spirit, so that way we know, because we have to guard what the Lord has entrusted us with. We have to guard those dreams. We have to guard them. Absolutely. Okay, so next. So we see here that his brothers are angry, they are upset, so they are going to plot to do something to Joseph. Because that's what happens when jealousy and anger and bitterness, when they take root, when they start to make themselves present, we know that when that happens, that bad things are about to happen. It affects our actions, it affects what we say, it affects our mood, it affects everything. So, in chapter 37, it said, when Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance. As he approached, They made plans to kill him. "Here comes the dreamer," they said. "Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. Who can, we can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." But when Reuben heard of their scheme, he came to Joseph's rescue. "Let's not kill him," he said. "Why should we shed any blood? Let's just throw him into this empty cistern here in the wilderness. Then he'll die without our laying a hand on him." Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph and return him to his father. So when Joseph arrived, his brothers ripped off the beautiful robe he was wearing when they grabbed him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. Just as they were sitting down to eat, they looked up and saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming towards them. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of gum, balm, and aromatic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain by killing our brother? We'd have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." And his brothers agreed. So when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brother pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver, and the traders took him to Egypt. So we see a lot is going on here. They are so angry that a lot of them are just like, let's just kill him. But then Reuben is like, you know what? I'm not down with that. Yeah, I'm not really his biggest fan either. But you know what? I don't want his blood on my hands. I don't think this is right. And so he kind of concocts another plan that'll please his brothers. But what they don't know is that he was going to come and save him later. And then when these traders come, they're like, you know what? We don't want to have this blood on our hands. And so instead, we'll just trade him to these people so he can become their slave. That way we don't have to worry about him anymore. So again, there's some things that we can learn from this, and that's number one, people will sometimes get jealous. Again, we know they were jealous. They were jealous of Joseph because of the dreams that he had. They were jealous of him because of the father's Jacob's love for Joseph. He was kind of the chosen child. He was kind of the golden child, like I mentioned before. And so they had all this jealousy built up, and jealousy leads to anger. It leads to bitterness. It leads to a bunch of ungodly things. And so that's exactly what happens here, is that they get jealous, and their jealousy leads them to act in ways in which they should not have. And then it says, God will not let you be destroyed. So I don't think it was any accident that those Ishmaelites, Midianite traders came. I believe it was God's will that Joseph not perish, but it was God's will that he live on, and he had a plan and a purpose for Joseph. He turned the situation around because Joseph was his, and so he turned the situation around, and instead of allowing Joseph to be killed, to be, just in the wilderness to rot, he sent, I believe, those traders to come by, and Joseph was sold to them. So now we're going to hop on over to chapter 39. Again, the story of Joseph and all of this story spans over several chapters. So for the sake of time, I'm just going to be kind of skipping around and getting the main points of each of these people. So if we go to chapter 39, when Joseph was taken to Egypt by the Ishmaelite traders, he was purchased by Potiphar, an Egyptian officer. Potiphar was captain of the guard for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. The Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. That's something else that I want to say. The Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything that he did. When we are in the presence of the Lord and we are walking the path that he has set before us, and we are in tune and in the center of his will, we will succeed in everything that we do. And sometimes that success might not look like what we think it should look like, but nonetheless, we will succeed in everything that we do if our hearts and our minds are stayed on him. It is so important for us to realize that when we are in his will, when we are living for him, when everything we do is centered around his perfect will for our lives, then everything that we do will succeed. Potiphar noticed that this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. This pleased Potiphar, so he soon made Joseph his personal attendant. He put him in charge of his entire household and everything he owned. From the day Joseph was put in charge of his master's household and property, the Lord began to bless Potiphar's household for Joseph's sake. All his household affairs ran smoothly, and his crops and livestock flourished. So Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything he owned. With Joseph there, he didn't worry about a thing except what kind of food to eat. Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man, and Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully. "Come and sleep with me," she demanded. But Joseph refused. "Look," he told her, "my masters trust me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God." So right here, Joseph is being tempted. He's being tempted by Potiphar's wife to do something that he knows that he ought not to do. And so Joseph here, he has come to a decision. Does he, he's a handsome young man and could, you know, have some pleasure maybe, but you know what? He doesn't want pleasure. He doesn't want the finite, earthly, momentary pleasure, but he wants to do what is right in the sight of the Lord. And I love how it says it here. And one of my friends pointed it out earlier when we were talking about Joseph. He said, "How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God." It wasn't that it would be a great sin against Potiphar. It wasn't that it would be a great sin against his father, Jacob, or anything like that. It would be a great sin against God. Joseph was wanting to serve the Lord and did not want to do this against God. She kept putting pressure on Joseph day after day, but he refused to sleep with her, and he kept out of her way as much as possible. One day, however, no one else was around when he went in to do his work. She came and grabbed him by his cloak, demanding, "Come on, sleep with me." Joseph tore himself away, but he left his cloak in her hand as he ran from the house. Then he saw that she was holding his cloak, and he had fled. She called out to her servants. Soon all the men came running. "Look," she said, "my husband has brought this Hebrew slave here to make fools of us. He came into my room to rape me, but I screamed. Then when he heard me scream, he ran outside and got away, but he left his cloak behind with me." She kept the cloak with her until her husband came home. Then she told him her story. "That Hebrew slave you've brought into our house tried to come in and fool around with me," she said. "But when I screamed, he ran outside, leaving his cloak with me." Potiphar was furious when he heard his wife's story about how Joseph had treated her, so he took Joseph and threw him into prison where the king's prisoners were held, and there he remained. But the Lord was with Joseph in prison and showed him his faithful love, and the Lord made Joseph favorite among the prison wardens. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. The warden had no worries because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. Again, the Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. Because you see here, what the enemy meant to do to destroy Joseph through, Potiphar's wife's lies are not going to end up destroying him, because you know what? When God is on your side, the enemy is not going to be able to have a footstool into your life and is not going to be able to be victorious over you. He is not going to be able to be victorious over you. But you know what? When you are exalted, when the Lord allows you to do great things for his kingdom, the enemy will try to attack. That is important to note. When God has big plans for you, and when you start stepping out in those big plans, the enemy is going to attack because the enemy is scared. The enemy knows that we are a force to be reckoned with when we are standing in the middle of God's will, when we're stepping into the destiny that God has for us. It terrifies the enemy, and so he will attack in any way that he can. And he used Potiphar's wife in this instant to do so. And so he was put into prison. And so you're like, oh my goodness, this is the lowest of the low. He's in prison now. There's no way for him to have success and to succeed. Like, you would think the story of Joseph is over at this point, but no, the Lord is with him, therefore he succeeds. So even in prison, he is able to build the trust with the prison warden, and then he's put in charge over all the other prisoners. So even when he is bound in chains, even when he is in prison, the Lord is still using him. And I think that is amazing. So then you go to chapter 40. And again, dreams play a part again. So sometime later, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker offended their royal master. Pharaoh became angry with these two officials, and he put them in prison, where Joseph was in the palace of the captain of the guard. They remained in prison for quite some time, and the captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, who looked after them. While they were in prison, the cupbearer and baker each had a dream one night, and each dream had its own meaning. So basically, in this chapter, we see that the cupbearer and the baker, they have these dreams, and we're going to see where Joseph interprets the dreams. And I'm not going to read all of it again because the story is so long and there's so much in this, but he interprets their dreams, and so he builds their trust. And so even in prison, God is allowing Joseph to use the gifts that he has given him. God is giving him opportunities even in prison, even when he's bound by chains. So sometimes, in different seasons, we feel like we're in the wilderness season. We feel like we're at our lowest of lows. And in those moments, it's easy for us to feel like maybe we can't be used, and that there's not a lot that we're going to be able to do in these seasons. But I want to encourage you that even in those seasons where you don't think you can be used, God can use you in mighty ways. God can use you in mighty ways. Just like he can use Joseph in prison, God can use you in those low seasons when you feel like you have nothing that you'll be able to give and to offer. God can still use you because it's not you that's doing it anyway. It's God. So then, after he does that, Pharaoh has a dream. It says 2 years later, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing on the bank of the Nile River. In this dream, he saw 7 fat, healthy cows come up out of the river and began gazing in the marsh grass. Then he saw 7 more cows coming up behind them from the Nile, but these were scrawny and thin. These cows stood behind the fat cows on the riverbank. Then the scrawny, thin cows ate the 7 healthy cows. At this point in the dream, Pharaoh woke up. So he wakes up and he realizes that all of this was a dream, but then he falls asleep again and he has a second dream. And I'm not going to go into what that second dream was. And Pharaoh sends for Joseph because he heard that Joseph can interpret dreams. And so Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once, and he was quickly brought from the prison. After he shaved and changed his clothes, he went in and stood before Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream last night, and no one here can tell me what it means. But I have heard that when you hear about a dream, you can interpret it. It is beyond my power to do this, Joseph replied, but God can tell you what it means and set you at ease. So I want to stop there for a minute. So Joseph here is showing his humility. He knows that it is not him that is actually interpreting his dreams, but it is God. And so instead of taking the credit, because at that moment he could have gone in front of Pharaoh, oh yeah, I am the dream interpreter. I am awesome. I am amazing. Tell me your dream and I will interpret it. No, he gives the glory to God and says, you know what? It is not me. I can't do this, but God can. And so it is important that we understand that there's nothing that we can do apart from the power of God. And so it is God working through us and not us working on our own behalf. We have to have that humility to understand that everything that we do, every gift that we have, comes from God. So we see here that, the dream is said to Joseph and he interprets the dream. Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his officials. So Pharaoh asked his officials, can we find anyone like this man so obviously filled with the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has revealed the meaning of the dream to you clearly, no one else is as intelligent or as wise as you. You will be in charge of my court and all my people, and and the people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a rank higher than yours." Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his hand and placed it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in fine linen clothing and hung a gold chain around his neck. Then he had Joseph ride in the chariot reserved for all of his second in command, and wherever Joseph went, the command was shouted, "Kneel down." So Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of all of Egypt. And Joseph said to him, "I am Pharaoh, but no one will lift a hand or foot in the entire land of Egypt without your approval." Then Pharaoh gave Joseph a new Egyptian name, Zephanath. He also gave him a wife whose name was Asenath. She was the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On. So Joseph took charge of the entire land of Egypt. He was 30 years old when he began serving in the court of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And when Joseph left Potiphar's presence, he inspected the entire land of Egypt. So here we see that Joseph was put in charge. And so we see that there's going to be famine in the land, and so Joseph is going to be in charge of making sure that there's enough grain for everybody, making sure that everybody only gets the grain that is allotted to them, and he's going to be put in charge because Pharaoh sees him as his second in command because he is intelligent and wise, and he realizes that the Spirit of God is on Joseph, and it's a man that he wants by his side and helping him rule Egypt. And so we see here again that Joseph is going to help to rule Egypt. Well, you would think, okay, this could be the ending of the story. So Joseph went from almost dying because his brothers were jealous to now he is Pharaoh's right hand. But you know what? The story is not over. There's still some redemption and some forgiveness to be had. So when you look into chapter 42, it says, "When Jacob heard that the grain was available in Egypt, he said to his sons, 'Why are you standing around looking at one another? I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy enough grain to keep us alive. Otherwise we'll die.' So Joseph's 10 older brothers went down to Egypt to buy grain, but Jacob wouldn't let Joseph's younger brother Benjamin go with them for fear something might harm him. So Jacob's sons arrived in Egypt along with others to buy food, for the famine was in Canaan as well. Since Joseph was governor of all of Egypt and in charge of selling grain to all the people, it was him that his brothers came. When they arrived, they bowed before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph recognized his brothers instantly, for he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where are you from?" he demanded. "From the land of Canaan," they replied. "We have come to buy food." Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they didn't recognize him, and he remembered the dreams he'd had about them many years before. He said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see how valuable or vulnerable our land has become." "No, my lord," they exclaimed. "Your servants have simply come to buy food. We are all brothers, members of the same family. We are honest men, sir. We are not spies." "Yes, you are," Joseph insisted. "You have come to see how vulnerable our land has become." "Sir," they said, "there are actually 12 of us. We are your servants, are all brothers, sons of a man living in the land of Canaan. Our youngest brother is back there with our father right now, and one of our brothers is no longer with us." But Joseph insisted, "As I said, you are spies. This is how I will test your story. I swear by the life of Pharaoh that you will never leave Egypt unless your youngest brother comes here. One of you must go and get your brother. I'll keep the rest of you here in prison. Then we'll find out whether or not your story is true. By the life of Pharaoh, if it turns out that you don't have a younger brother, then I'll know you are spies." So basically, they go back and they get Benjamin, and Benjamin comes and kind of proves that, hey, they're not spies. Although Joseph knows who they are. Joseph knows who they are, they just don't recognize him. But Joseph wants to see his younger brother Benjamin. Um, the brothers returned to Egypt, but the famine continued to ravage the land of Canaan. When the grain they had bought from Egypt was almost gone, Jacob said to his sons, "Go back and buy us a little more food." But Judah said, "The man was serious when he warned us. You won't see my face again unless your brother is with you. If you send Benjamin with us, we will go down and buy more food. But if you don't let Benjamin go, we won't go either." "Remember," the man said, "you won't see my face again unless your brother is with you." "Why were you so cruel to me?" Jacob moaned. "Why did you tell him you had another brother?" "The man kept asking us questions about our family," they replied. He asked, "Is your father still alive? Do you have another brother?" So he answered his questions. How could we know? He would say, "Bring your brother down here." Judah said to his father, "Send the boy with me, and we will be on our way. Otherwise we will all die of starvation, and not only we, but you and our little ones. I personally guarantee his safety. You may hold me responsible if I don't bring him back to you. Then let me bear the blame forever. If we hadn't wasted all this time, we could have gone and returned twice by now." So their father Jacob finally said to them, "If it can't be avoided, then at least do this. Pack your bags with the best products of this land. Take them down to the man as gifts: balm, honey, gum, aromatic resin, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Also take double the money that was put back in your sacks, as it was probably someone's mistake. Then take your brother and go back to the man. May God Almighty give you mercy as you go before the man, so that he will release Simeon and let Benjamin return. But if I must lose my children, so be it." So the men packed Jacob's gifts and doubled the money and headed off with Benjamin. They finally arrived in Egypt, presented themselves to Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the manager of his household, "These men will eat with me at this noon. Take them inside the palace. Then go and slaughter an animal, prepare a big feast." So the man did as Joseph told him, and took them to Joseph's palace. The brothers were terrified when they saw that they were being taken into Joseph's house. "It's because of the money someone put in our sacks last time we were here," they said. "He plans to pretend that we stole it. Then he will seize us, make us slaves, and take our donkeys." So they are scared, but you know what? Another plan is about to happen. So we see that they're out here. So they have this feast. Relax and don't be afraid. And they're here. And a lot happens. And we're not going to go into whatever else happens. So Joseph really does have the power here because he knows who his brothers are at this point. But his brothers don't understand that it is him. Because he's been given a new name. And, it's been years. So he probably looks a little different, a little more rugged. You know, a little more grown up, and so they don't recognize him. And so Joseph really does have the power here. He could do whatever he wanted to his brothers at this moment. He could really get revenge. But you know what? That is not the story. That is not the story here. That is not the story, despite that it could be. So in chapter 45, we're going to jump to chapter 45. And Joseph is going to reveal his identity to his brothers. He says Joseph could stand it no longer. There were many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, "Out, all of you." So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. Then he broke down and wept. He wept so loudly the Egyptians could hear him, and word of it quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace. "I am Joseph," he said to his brothers. "Is my father still alive?" But his brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. "Please come closer," he said to them. So they came closer, and again he said, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt. But don't be upset and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. This famine that has ravished the land for 2 years will last 5 more years, and there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God has sent me ahead of you to keep you and your families alive and to preserve many more survivors." So it was God who sent me here, not you. And he is the one who made me an advisor to Pharaoh, the manager of the entire palace, and the governor of all of Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and tell him, "This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me master over all the land of Egypt, so come down to me, and immediately you can live in the region of Goshen, where you can be near me with all your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and everything you own. I will take care of you there, for there are still 5 years of this famine ahead of us. Otherwise, your household and all your animals will starve." Then Joseph added, "Look, you can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that I really am Joseph. Go tell my father of my honored position here in Egypt. Describe for him everything you have seen, and then bring my father here quickly." Reaping with joy, he embraced Benjamin, and Benjamin did the same. Then Joseph kissed each of his brothers and wept over them, and after that they began talking freely with him. So that is the end of where we're going to read, but there's some things that we can note there. Like I said, Joseph really had power in that moment because he could have told his brothers, "Hey, you guys did this. You guys were the ones that caused this stuff to happen to me. And he could have been like, you know what? I'm not going to allow y'all to have grain. I'm not going to forgive you. But no, instead, he was like, you know what? I'm going to identify who I am. And I'm going to let you know that, you know what? It was actually God's will for me to be here. Because Joseph understood that, yes, his brothers had evil intent, but you know what? God turned it around. And God really had a plan and a purpose for Joseph to be in Egypt. And although, again, the motives of his brothers were not pure, God, again, turned it around, because it says in Romans 8:28 that God will turn all things for good for them who love him and are called according to his purposes. And that means that even what the enemy means for evil in our lives, if we are serving God, God can turn it around for our good. And he did that for Joseph. And because of Joseph's rank, he was able to help his family out. And so, yes, he was basically leading over his family, like those dreams said, but he wasn't leading over them just so that they could bow down and worship him and have to listen to him and all of that. He was doing it so he could preserve their life and to save his family. And so this is a beautiful story of forgiveness. Joseph chooses to forgive his brothers, knowing that he was meant and destined to be in Egypt for such a time as this. So he forgave his brothers, and his brothers were able to see the love of God and forgiveness from God. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. A beautiful, beautiful story. So let's recap what we can learn from Joseph's life. The first thing that we can learn is God is the one that gives dreams. God is the one that gives us those spiritual gifts. So when we have these dreams, they're not from us. We can't do anything of our own accord. It's all from God. Number two, we have to learn to not let pride get in the way. Joseph had a moment of his human flesh getting in the way, and he kind of got a little prideful. And then he shared because of that pride, he shared the dream in the wrong time and caused a lot of strife. And then, because of the jealousy of other people, he was meant to be destroyed. So he was sold into slavery. But God did not let him be destroyed. God did not let that be the end for Joseph. But instead, he allows Joseph to be made Potiphar's personal assistant. But then we know that whenever we are placed in positions and serving the Lord and doing what the Lord wants us to do, the enemy is going to come. And so Potiphar's wife lied on him, and then he was put in prison. But you know what? Prison wasn't the end of his story either. He thought he was at his lowest of lows. But you know what? Even when we're in those lowest of lows, wilderness seasons, we can learn from Joseph that God can use us in those seasons. God can use us in those seasons. And because he allowed the Lord to use him in that season, he ended up interpreting not only the cupbearer and the baker's dreams, but the dream of Pharaoh. And then he was made second in command in Pharaoh, in Egypt, and a second Pharaoh. And his name was changed, and he was given the signet ring, and he was put in charge. And then because of that, and because of the position he was in, and because he was helping with the famine, he ended up having a second chance with his brothers. And instead of using that second chance to incite vengeance on his brothers, he forgave his brothers and he saved his family from starvation. The story of Joseph is a beautiful story that we can learn a lot from. He truly is one of my favorite biblical heroes. Again, there was a lot more that I could say about Joseph simply because there are so many chapters and so many little things in there. But we had to shorten it because I didn't want this to be a 7-hour long podcast. But again, there's a lot that we can learn from Joseph, and I'm glad that we got to dig in deep with that together today. So next week we are going to continue our biblical heroes series, and we are actually going to talk about Mary. We're going to talk about Mary, the mother of Jesus. I wanted to highlight both men and women because I am a firm believer that both men and women can be in places of ministry. Both men and women can be used by God for his glory. And honestly, one of my favorite women in the Bible is the mother of Jesus. how cool of a story that it is. And so we are going to be talking about Mary next week. And then in a couple of weeks, we're going to have special guest Pastor Cherokee Parker back with us, and we are going to discuss the importance of having godly friends and surrounding yourself with godly people who will encourage you. So you have all of that to look forward to. So we are going to pray and ask that God would solidify everything that He has taught us today, everything that we have talked about, that we would take it to heart. So, dear Heavenly Father, God, I thank you for the opportunity to do this podcast episode again today. God, I thank you that you have given me this gift, and that not for my glory, but God, so that your name can be known and that biblical truth can be proclaimed to the ends of the earth. And God, I pray that we would learn from the life of Joseph, God, that we would learn to not let pride step in the way, that we would learn to act in the gifts that you have given us for your glory, that we would learn to be aware that the enemy is going to attack as we are serving you. And God, that we would learn to forgive, that we would learn to forgive those that would become maybe jealous of what you're doing in our life, or would try to stifle what you're doing in our life, God, that we would not incite vengeance on them, but instead that we would forgive because you have forgiven us, and so we should freely forgive others. God, and I just love you and I thank you, and it's in your name I pray. Amen. I look forward to being with you guys next week and talking about Mary, the mother of Jesus. Love you all.